So for those who are completely new and haven't watched any of these videos before, I will recommend going back and watch episode 1 at least. Probably also episode 2, but definitely go back and watch episode 1. And again, thank you, Maximus, for this lovely screenshot of me going crazy. I will guarantee anyone who actually goes back and watches this video, this will make a lot more sense than just this picture does here in this screenshot here, right? But yeah, definitely. So so we already talked a little bit last time about potential play. I will sort of recap quickly just to catch up for anyone, but also just to sort of precurse some of the things that we'll deep dive into and have a look at. So the core elements of the game. I'm not going to be breaking them down like I did last time, what they are, what they cover, why they're here on this platter, but it's just to remind everyone that this sort of context does exist for the discussion. And the important thing that I've sort of to extract from that and made it a little bit more clear is this layering. So that when we go into the Blood Bowl match itself, this is very much the thing that you need to be mindful of at any given moment when you're playing the game. So I've sort of called this the core match layers, and it's sort of like from the overview we had before. You have the match goals that sort of trickles down into the match life cycles. Like, if are we building our team? Are we focused on just winning? Is a draw enough? Like, what is the objectives for the game? How do we plan to execute that on a timetable that fits the 16 turns? And that, of course, goes back and forth. I lost 10 players on the first turn. I might need to set a new match goal. It's just not realistic. The match goal might not be just survive with the last players, right? So in that sense, that this back and forth, and it's never really amazing here. All or nothing. Like, it's not you set one goal and then never changes. It's a fluent thing up and down all the time, right? Phrasing. The life cycle is the same, that it reflects down to the match stage. And again, for those who just not aware, it's basically the if you walked over to someone's table, like, how many rerolls do they have left? What's the score? What's the weather? Where are the pieces? Are they prone? Are how many injuries? Like, what does the match look like at this point? And there's the reason why there's a separation between board state and a match state is that board actually only cares about what is on the board. A match state also cares what is next to the table, meaning like KOs and stuff like that. So we care about the match state. Board state is also important, but match state is generally what we are focusing on. I might wrongfully sometimes just call it board state, but bear with me here, of course, right? And this again trickles down to the action planning. So if I have this board state and I want to go to another board state, and how do I manage to do that? I look at the action planning, right? And this, of course, fits up to all the layers above. And then when we have a sequence of actions that we want to do, we start executing them. And hopefully, Nuffle will allow us to execute them as we would like. He has a tendency to say no. Computer says no. And we will have to reassess and sometimes actually go back in the middle of a turn and go like, I had planned for something. I had foreseen something else to happen here. I need to go back and reassess that, right? And if everything goes as planned, yeah, Nuffle says snakes. I think we need to have a emoji for that one, definitely. Nuffle says snakes, yes. Sometimes you have it that's Nuffles, and sometimes it's other things that just didn't go the way you planned it. God forbid it's the UI or something like that. But this is what we will probably be looking on next section again, because I think this is sort of the last sort of pinnacle that of the three sort of, in my opinion, sort of most important things. Like, goals everyone should be able to set, like, from just looking at the game, right? This is the most overlooked one, I think. This one and this one is where most people I think is struggling, and this is something most people can do, but there's actually some details to it that can actually be optimized, right? So, as we talked about yesterday, I was going to say, positional play is about what players remaining on the board, what state are they in, and what are the placements, and how do we optimize that? And it's done with the balancing between the ball, positional play. Just to recap. This is also recap, so I'll just show it, but I won't go into it. So that was sort of the prelude, a quick insight and sort of introduction to what's everything here, right? So what are we actually looking at today? This is the thing that we're sort of looking at. This is the thing to be understanding in that when we look at positional play, what we are looking at is mostly this area here, the third layer. That what we're trying to manage is saying, like, from match state A to match state B, what do I foresee going to happen according to the life cycle? And then do planning to actions that fits that. So what we'll be covering today from this deep dive is something I've sort of called patterns, distance, cages, and one-turn touchdowns. So these are, at least in my opinion, like the four main subsections that is crucial to master within positional play. Like, we did a lot of, let's say, it broad terms of it last time, but these are for me like the main subjects that needs to be sort of covered. So I made this lovely drawing to also sort of symbolize the balance between that. What we need to do is this thing about, like, attack and defend. Are we attacking the ball? Are we defending the ball? Are we taking a position? Are we defending a position? Are we attacking players? Are we defending our players? Kicking, receiving, and so on down there. So if my technique, God forbid this should fail, I can go like this, and then I can open my snippet tool, and hopefully in a second you will all be seeing this in my snippet tool instead. I'm just double checking myself just to be sure here. Yep, that's perfect. So the first thing we had on the list before is the patterns, what I've called it. And patterns, in my opinion, has much to do with the whole receiving and kicking aspect of the game. So basically, you put up patterns for either defending or attacking. We also do it for some of the others, but let's just start with these two because these are the two more common ones, right? So more or less everyone, when they started to play, or sooner or later in one of their games, have more or less done the infamous pattern of just putting 11 players shoulder to shoulder across the board. That's probably, let's call it, the most basic pattern of anything you can do. And then your opponent does the same, and we just roll dice, right? So when I started playing Blood Bowl, and I was like, I was at that point 13, 14 years old, this seemed like a great idea. You get to roll lots of dice. You get to do lots of damage. This must be clearly the best thing to do in the world, right? I might have a slight different point of view on it today, but so from there on, I think more classic ones that I've seen nowadays that has sort of become really popular is claiming the free squares here, and then putting sort of a minimum on the front line to get bashed, 3 pieces to protect the rest of your players. You are close enough to the opponent that you can sort of quickly react. You can cover most of the field, but you are also in a position where your fragile players, like say if you're playing Dark Elves, is a good example, right? These are your runner, your Witch Elf, your vulnerable pieces that you don't want to be hit in the head too much. You can protect them over here. These two guys here are most likely going to be where the splits is going to be coming, and so pick players accordingly for these two positions. This is probably one of the most common defenses you'll see. A quick variation of this is the classic offset. This is generally any player who has hive movement. They will do this one. The reasoning for the offset is, like we talked about positioning last time, is you in this case, you're sort of going for, I'm not sure if I'm doing these numbers correctly, so just hold with me anyway, is that you are saying, like, if I'm Skaven over here and your dwarfs over here, or this is just to make it extreme, it's about the mobility difference here. If you wanna swing around, I already created the pocket for you. And I can easily still come in and close behind you because I have movement enough to do that. So you are not giving up that much. And if you do try to, as dwarves, to plow through over here, you're already in trouble because there's like a thick hedge you need to cut through even, right? So this is a typical sort of offset defense it's usually referred to, where you, as an attacking player, you need to be exactly mindful of this trap. That this is usually what they're trying to do. They're trying to either get you to go in here and basically be able to close you off, and it's much easier to hear than if what they would do is what I sort of like call the peak defense, where you have sort of like here, because it allows you as the attacker, in this case the dwarves, to go this way or that way. So you need more versatility in your defense because you need to be able to actually swing both ways. But if you are humans instead of saying Skaven, you don't have as much movement. So this might be a better because it's easier for less movement to come to the sides. But whatever is over here will not be swinging over there in one turn, and vice versa. So when you see your opponent doing this, and you will most likely be a Skaven or a Wood Elf player, be mindful of that's what they're sort of trying to lure you into. Okay. Then there is a classic, for, let's call it for orcs, dwarves, and chaos or something similar, is the, and then either here or if they're a little bit scared of you, here. The idea is basically, I don't want to give you positions to assist from without I get something in return. So if you go in here, for example, I have 3 Black Orcs standing here. If you want to get assist on them from the side, you're going to have to give me something in return. And since there's 2 pieces, you can't blitz them away. If I only put 1, you can blitz them away and you can get here for sort of say free. So that's why you're putting 2. That also means that the more, I would say, if I'm not so scared of you, because you don't scare me, the skills you have on your team, I might even go out to here. The problem with this is I'm exposing all my players. So this is if I'm playing orcs against some types of elves, this is most likely what I would do. So this type of defense is exactly sort of you spreading out, covering as much as the field, making it harder for the elves to come around. You're not really scared that they'll punch you, and anywhere they go in, most likely, like unless they take did they need to get a guard? So they would put a guard here or here, right, for that position, even if they have one, right? Or they have to take a single dice, or they have to go all the way out here on the edge and start doing stuff. And that's much more vulnerable and in a weak position, right? So you need to sort of be covering this. So this is more spread, but if you're playing like Orc versus Chaos instead, this is not good because they will just trump in with all their guard pieces and they will rip your team up because you will not win the strength war against Chaos most likely. Dwarves, maybe. Like we just talking typical, like not all versions of teams of Chaos, all versions of Dwarves. It's like this is the stereotype of what those type of teams will look like. Versus humans, I would definitely dare to do this generally. But if it's those more, let's say, batchy ones, I would pull these 2 lines back in. So the reason why I call this patterns and not just let's call it defenses or attacks for kickoffs is that this approach, whether it's this one or some of the other ones, works even if you place them further back the line. It functions the same way. The only difference is that there's not a kickoff, so there's not a fixed position of that to do. They are on the other side. But if I'm going to say, like, let's say whatever gone before, and I need to build a new defense line around what happened there. around here, I can still repeat the same pattern. I'll have 2 players or similar in front and have lines of 2 if I'm orcs. If I am doing a elven sort of thing and I want to do I can do the offset defense right again. And basically making sure that I'm thereby forcing my opponent to go around this way. It works just as well down here on the field as it does up here or when you're receiving. So the idea of this pattern works the same way. It has the same effect, right? I might get into that one, Maximus, Maximus. But yeah. So the idea is that the patterns are in that way recyclable for other purposes too. So if I look at that, the typical pattern that you don't see as much on a defensive line, but everywhere else is the one that called the Elven defense, right? It is basically columns of 2 players. And if it was to a kickoff, you would probably do something like this. That put maybe the last player there. The reasoning for this is that the whole function of the Elven Sword defense is that these columns cannot be erased with 1 blitz. So if I take out this one, there's still this guy left. That means that coming past it is hard. Since it would be on a kickoff, they would have 3 players at minimum basing these guys and punching those. They could blitz the next guy and they would be past it. So this is often why you don't see this specific pattern as a defense pattern on a receiving, on a kicking play, because it sort of counters its profile. I have, however, seen, let's call it a modified version of this, quite a few times, where you still doing basically the columns in here, but then you drop down and only place 1 here. The idea is basically I have a line that still soaks up everything. I have the 3 players that I need to sacrifice, and I've now put it so that there is a line of 5 players, sort of minimum I can do, and cover the whole field. I don't rely on those 3, and they will go down on the first turn, but you only get to blitz 1 of them, and that means that wherever you punch a hole is the only way you will get access to my half, right? If it's there, if it's the blitz is up here, you get access to here, right? And you won't get access to all the other stuff because it's basically blocked off. So if you have a crunch on timetable and you need to hold him for just 2 or 3 turns, this type of play, as dwarves, orcs, whoever you are, this is the most efficient way of covering. You can even take these 3 players in front and put them right next to each other. That doesn't really, in this case, matter that much. The idea is more these 5 here, that you are saying like you need to funnel all your players through with 1 hole. And unless you're playing like against Wood Elves or Skaven, this doesn't really matter because they can pour so much quickly through here that it doesn't really stop them much. But if you're playing against even like orcs or humans or God forbid dwarves, this is a huge issue. It will eat up so much of my time going like this. That this is killing me. And even if I get through, you will have all your backup players to attack wherever I am, right? So if you want to stall out a turn, eat a turn from the clock for on a defense, this is not a bad. Because like if you're an orc player and you got 3 turns to score, if you do this, they will most likely not have time. The other version of this, I think let's do the Elven columns finish first, and then I'll move to the next one. So the Elven columns is the traditional where you're just building rows of 2 across the field. And you might not have enough to cover the whole field because you also want to be using other stuff. But the idea is here, if the opponent's here, now he needs to sort of migrate all the way down here to get around. And orcs, humans, or similar ilk, they just don't have movement for this kind of thing. And it delays them so much that they will actually end up having a hard time getting down here. The reason why we don't do this as much versus orcs or black orcs or stuff like that, they can just plow through. And we can't really stop them. But for middle mobility, not strength for knock, this becomes a really big problem. There's a slight variation of this where you, instead of going like straight lines, you go chevrons. The only thing is to keep repeating that pattern down the field. The idea of the difference is that if this guy gets taken out up here, the other guy will be here. But this is such a small gap that even if you do fall through, you will most likely be in a dangerous situation. And by doing so, I can even claim this square, and that makes it even harder for you to come down here. So it's a soft sort of shift from this side to that side. If you tilt them the other way, you are saying, I'm going to make it a little bit harder for you to come in here, and I'm going to claim that square instead. But if I blitz that one, it is easier to come round, but easier to go that way, harder to get that way. So which side do you want to make it harder for them to sort of get around to? That depends on the clock and skills on the team, stuff like that. But also, do you have sidestep or stand firm or all those small details, right? But that's variations of the Elven columns you can do, right? So that's sort of the Elven columns. And then it works also for other teams and elves, but it's just so commonly used by elves that it is sort of named for them that this is, so to speak, their pattern. Okay, I need to, yep, I did it wrong, blah, blah, blah. We went back here. So, yeah. What else was there of defenses that's sort of classic? Try to remember here. What's the element? Try to remember here. That's always dangerous. You can also do, yeah, now I remember this one. Yes, of course. So a variation of Elven columns for a kickoff is to put the 3 in the middle, and then you put chevrons here. I have to do counting here, 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 and here. So there's a variation of this where all these chevrons are pushed one further back, and the difference between the two versions is basically quick snap. That's the thing you're sort of worried about. Like without quick snap, the first one with the high sort of say chevrons is I would say more likely to actually be able to stop them and cause a lot of more headaches for them. But the quick snap will completely nullify your defense and crush it. So how scared are you of this right quick snap? If the quick snap doesn't happen, this is a better precision generally in most, like 98% of the teams. If there's a quick snap, it is better to put them down here. The downside of having it, the lower ones is it is easier to get through. This type of defense is generally used for, I want to force my opponent in through this funnel. And if he's lack of a better word, silly or risky enough that he wants to go this way, I will accept that. But if he does that, he will have nothing more or less to react with. So you need to be a decent player, have a little bit of luck, and have the right skills in your team to be able to clean up this one and still be able to come through here. And if you do, unless you get in your Wood Elves or Skaven, you don't have movement to you can actually claim much space. So this is generally if you want to stop a 2-turn touchdown for, like, say, orcs or humans or similar, because this just doesn't give them a time enough so that they'll get much more than 1-2 piece down here, and we will swarm them, blitz one, and swarm the other one, and we can most likely stop this. Same if they go on the side, right? Skaven are generally just impossible to stop anyway, so they will probably just dodge down straight through your lines and stuff like that. So really hard to stop them. We need We need Nuffle on our side basically to stop that sort of, or to say bullshit. But yeah. So for stopping not the fastest teams, you can definitely use this one for stopping it. That killing the 2-turn touchdowns. This should be a good starting place. Of course, you don't put all your fastest player on the sides because they won't get over here anyway. So it's better to put your fastest players sort of in the middle, and that goes for all the defenses, right? Because it gives you more of a reaction option than if they are all over on the side. The only counter argument is that usually those are also the pieces that have the side steps and something like that, which makes them more useful over here on the edge of the chevrons. Lovely drawing yet again here, right? So yeah, that is probably, I would say, among the most common defenses I can think of right now. Just thinking if there's any defense that we sort of forgot here. Yeah, okay. So just take it for sort of completion. There's two things. So the classic two defenses that I have, I've actually saved them on my positioning for all teams. Is the one I call it's the back line. I call it. It's not the official name. It's just what I call it on my positioning is, and you just have to do the counting here. That's not the right square. We need to be here, 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 and here. Right. And most likely, we will not put those in the middle. We can do that, but just to make even just the life for our opponent a little bit harder, we're going to do an offset to the side. And I'll explain why in a second here. So the idea is basically here, you are at the final turn. You just need the match to finish. So what are we doing here? So we're trying to limit the one-turn stop turns. And this I would still do this against dwarves or something like Nuffle, you never know, another react. And also because this limits the players that can actually be engaged and destroyed in most cases to be those free up here. So you, as an orc player, that's a good example, you would put your free linos up here. If they get sorted, who cares? It's safe, right? And should they be able to get some magical pushing, shoving, and that thing, you still have a very decent defense against the one-turn touchdown. And the reason why we are putting it to the side and not in the middle is that if they put free players here and they put their 5 over here, which is the ones who can straight up pounce, right? That means that they're already now limiting how many players there can be over here. That means they can only put one more over here. That makes it harder for them to sort of swarm around, and it's not a huge impact, but it just minimizes, again, tiny bit how much damage they can actually do to those players up here. And over a ladder run with, say, like 40 games on your team, this will actually start to matter, right? And especially if you have a soft, squishy team like Pro Elves or something like that, let's just minimize the attrition that your team suffers. Like, even though we don't care about the linos, they still 8 gold every time they need to be replaced. So just minimize it, right? It also makes it harder for them to do magical one-turns against, like, Skaven or whatever. So, for anyone who doesn't throw players towards your backend, this is the defense I would use. I will go into a separate discussion about one-turns later, and I'll have a little bit of deep dive on that. So let's just park that. But for anything else where you're just trying, like, I don't want to get hit, I want to minimize my damage, and I want to minimize, like, bad luck. Or God forbid that we get a bonus turn, and instead of, like, the game being over after this turn, this next turn, this is a good position to be in. And like I said just before also, let's just not put the things that we need to really defend if it comes to that. Don't put them out on the sides because it limits where they can go. We don't want to give the attacker that sort of, like, say, legiancy to pick where he wants to. Yep. Any questions so far? Otherwise, it's just me rambling again. It's completely quiet. Cool. So the other alternative to that is teams that throw. And the reason why that is a nuisance is because if it's team that throw, it is mostly going to be a stunty. And if it's Dundee, it doesn't care how strong defensive positions we make down here, as in how many tackle zones they need to go through. It is how many. So in that, we want to sort of spread out and make a pattern where, just like the one with the 5 we did earlier, cover the field in as many tackle zones as possible. This will basically generate a grid where there's tackle zones. We're using the same players, we're just spreading them out so that we're covering an absolutely maximum of tackle zones. And that means that if a goblin or halfling is being thrown from up here, they will most likely end up in a tackle zone. And they don't really want to be throwing out here because it's further range, right? But on top of that, there's also a higher risk of a player migrating off field. So they generally want to throw here, and that's why we're claiming these ones in here. And that means that on a normal run, they will probably have to go dodging through 6 squares before getting down here. So that's why this is the pattern I use for, like, if I'm playing against goblins, halflings, orc teams with goblin and a troll or renegades or whoever. Like, there's a lot of teams who can do like the throwing stuff, right? This is the pattern that I use. Yes, these 3 pieces become a little bit more vulnerable to say punches from quick teams, but usually quick teams don't have the option to throw, so this shouldn't be a problem. So, but just like I also said earlier, these patterns of putting your players in also works in other situations. So are you playing against the goblin team? They have been now walking down here, and you just want to create as much of a tackle zone for them to get through. This also works. And if we just imagine like this is a normal defense and they have sort of camped out here, and we just need to make sure that they're not getting down to the end zone, this actually also works. Even if they blitz one of these pieces, there will still be 3 layers of tackle zones to go through, right? So the patterns function the same way. Cool. Any question, boys and girls? I feel like the teacher standing in the head of class and just looking over the students, and it's all quiet, looking scared up at the teacher, going like, I don't want to say anything. Okay. So, if we go back to, let's see if I can. Yes. So for exactly, if let's just make pretend here. Oh, that was the wrong one. Bloop, bloop. Is there a second option to this one where you can erase all? Oh, there it was. So if we are just blocking a cage coming down the field, yes, you don't want to be standing down here, because you are again, then you're losing that last touch. You want to be standing here, and then have you can either do let's call it the elven columns, right? Or you can do a spread out to cover more area. But the effect is basically the same. You want a line of untouched players causing the blitz needs to go on them, and then you will have a full line of things that can't go through. So that you're forcing your opponent to do a minimum of 3 dodges. And are you playing against that God from hell with 2 heads and HE1, right? Like, no amount of tackle zone is going to stop him from just, but at least we can make him roll as many dice as possible. And then, God forbid, Nuffle being unkind, he might actually punish him, right? Still, but yes, we don't want to go down here unless it's there's a different reason to it. We want to stand here so that the dodge. I might have misplaced him last example. Good catch. But yeah. So the other thing I sort of mentioned in the list of core things was the thing about distance. So if we look at distance, what I mean by distance is just ignore where this is on the field. The placement is not important. If I place one player here, I create a zone of tackle zone around me. So if I place another player over here, I will create another 9x9 grid over here. And if these two are intact and still standing in my opponent's turn, any movement through this area is very difficult. Like corner cutting is definitely a thing that is possible, but much more than that, it becomes really, really difficult in most cases. So in most cases, a distance of 2 is fine. The difference becomes in if we just go down here and I halve that distance. I go that the distance is 1. I'll start creating overlapping spaces. There's a space in here where there's overlapping. And that means that these squares in here are going to get even harder to get through. The corners are still an issue for us, but we have made this area in here. And if I need to stop a gutter runner that doesn't have all the trimmings, but just a regular gutter runner, this even becomes a dangerous path for them. But even then, let's take a gutter runner in here. First square is 3. That's a 4+, that's a 3+, and that's a 2+ with a reroll. It's actually not that difficult. It's 75%. It is 1 in 9 and 1 in 36, right? So even this, and that's why like if we have 3 players, place 1 there, and 1 there. The gutter runner will be running over here, of course, because there's no reason why not to, because it would be 1 in 9, 1 in 9, 1 in 36. So they would definitely do that. There might be other reasons why they don't want to go here. There might be diving tackle, there might be tackle pieces. But if you're just looking at the numbers, right? So the distance between your players in this scenario here is crucial. We can also start making walls. And if we do that, we start creating zones of 2, right? And we sort of also create a path where they can't go through unless they have leap, of course, right? But the edges will still be soft. And we're going to have to spend a lot of models just creating a short wall. With 1 distance, with the same amount of players, we can make a lot longer. And with a huge gapping, we can make a very long wall with very few players. So depending on how many players you have and what you're up against, you need to space out your players in different distances. This is the very basic of distancing and using that. And since this is a deep dive, I will go even one step further. So we looked at it now on a purely, let's call it standing side to side, right? This is what happens if we start to set them offset. This is sort of, oh, that's not the right place. Here we need to put them, right? So these 2 patterns here, and the same distance, but they don't work the same way. This one creates a wall that is hard to sort of navigate because it's straight, so it means I have to go further around either way. Here, it is definitely easier to go this way than it is to go that way. But sometimes that is exactly what I want. I want them to go that way, so let's make it easier for them. So we force them into this path here. Or it might be that I really don't want them to go that way, so I'll do this instead. So the downside of doing this is if we again take that gutter runner, straight up normal gutter runner, he will get the first square free. It will be a 3 in 1 in 9 and a 36, and he's already through. That is very likely he will just run through that. Here it takes 2 1s and 9s and a 36. So we lost a 1 in 9 chance by doing this offset. So just the tiny little difference in the distance and pattern here makes a huge difference between how hard it is to get through. And the same goes like if we mush these 2 like a one up and start doing overlapping. Of course, this makes those squares harder. But if he goes in, again, the first square is free. So it's a 1 in 4 and a 36 and he's out. That's 75% chance. And more or less, let's call it guaranteed one, right? So more or less 75% chance to still plow through right that. And that's with a gap of 1. So how we position these at any given time to create those patterns and positions that we need is crucial. And understanding the difference between how this works and this works is the key to making your walls strong and strong enough, or making them basically holes that they can just run through willy-nilly, right? So even if you take that a step further and saying like, okay, so we had where they now, let's take it one further. So we take it 1 and we put it 2 behind. This becomes a very loose pattern in the sense that, yes, there is still screening going on here. Like there's no squares I'm getting from here to over here without going through a tackle zone. But I also just need to go through one tackle zone. Either that one or that one, and I will be free on the other side, right? So this won't stop a gutter runner, of course, but it will probably stop a Saurus. It will stop a Black Hawk, maybe. It would definitely stop a troll. So if I just need a troll to be stopped, then this is perfectly fine. If I need to stop a gutter runner, I probably need them to be up here next to each other. But this is just 2 models, right? So if you extrapolate that up to your 11 players, this makes a huge difference between how you place them. This is not even talking about double stacking placements or anything like that. But just a mere, like we're looking at the distance between our players and what gaps that create. Like a good example of a something that looks fairly safe but is still horrendous is clear this again. So if I place one model here, and I place one here, and I place one here, and I place one here. And there's a gutter runner from hell here, and he wants to score here, and there's not really any path out here. He has to go through somewhere in here, right? That looks fairly safe. It has a lot of tackle zones, and it looks to be fairly safe. The problem is there's a grid here, there's a grid here, there's a grid here, and there's a grid here. That means that there's actually a square free here. That means he will be able to go in here and here. That's a 1 in 36. And from here, he just needs to go in here. That's a free because it's out of nowhere. And then he needs to dodge here and here. These are 1s and 9s. And then 36 out here, which is basically a free dodge again, right? And then here's a touchdown. So by just having that one tiny square there makes a huge difference, right? Because we didn't cover this area correctly for whatever reason. So the distance, the pattern that we put things in really, really, really matters when we want to build walls. And for positional plays, it's much about building walls, like not just letting them run around like they want to, but we want to control where they go, right? So now I have to remember here. Let's see, what was the last one I put on the list? Oh, cages. So yeah, so this is very much about the defending aspect of it, like when you're trying to defend from someone trying to score on you, right? So the flip side of that is if you're sort of attacking, all the patterns that we looked at works the same way offensively. If you want to be sort of screening the ball, and if you are like Dark Elves, you don't need to and you shouldn't be building cages that often. You should basically most often be screening the ball. You shouldn't be caging, but sometimes caging is the right option. But it's generally much more about screening and building those walls to protect your ball. If you are, on the other hand, say an orc, human, chaos, dwarves, whatever, you're gonna need to be building cages because you want to stop those pesky elves or Skaven or whatever to get in and grab at your ball. So the completely most utterly standard cage is the 5-piece white. This is the most common one, right? And if you have 2 guard pieces, put them at the opposite corner, because if you do, there's no of those 4 squares that can't be dived without them getting a guard to assist you. Whether it's those 2 corners or those 2 corners, doesn't matter. Just don't put them on the same side, because if you do, that means that there is a square over here that is not have any guard assists. Most classic, right? So there's versions of this where it gets a little bit more interesting. And this is where, if you don't have the players because they're being busy somewhere else or whatever, we can do something. So there is the lighter version. We only have 3 pieces to protect us and a ball carrier. The idea here is that basically you have a soft screen in front, and you will have a guard for whoever comes in and blocks the ball carrier. You are sacrificing that they don't need to dive, and more relying on, well, if I get 2 dice, I especially if this is guard piece, but even if not, because you've been screening off over here also, so they really need to be coming that way around, right? Is that they will get 2 dice uphill, and if you go both got block and dodge and sure hands, like odds of you losing that ball is close to 0. So this actually might be perfectly valid still defense. It could also be like you're forced into that because we don't have more players. Then you can sort of still do that 3 piece here, and it's safe-ish, using less players, of course. Then there is the light version, which is the I don't want to be giving you an easy 2 ball dice on my ball carrier, and it works in either direction. It doesn't work diagonally. It works only in straight lines. The idea is basically you're sacrificing 3 pieces, your ball carrier and 2 others, so that unless he has a guard, he's not going to get 2 dice. Because there's no way to get an assistant on the guy in the middle, right, without you have guard. So, and if you especially also have guard on those 2, this is actually not that easy to cut through as would appear. So this is like, I would call a minimum of a cage. Anything less than this is not a cage in my opinion more. Then you're just screening with 1 player. You can also do cages along the sides of the table. Now, the math is generally anywhere sort of in this area here of the middle of the field, I would do traditional cages. And once you get further out than that, you need to consider that you're now having a cage towards the side, and it slightly changes the math. So, classic example is if you just take the standard 5 cage and you put it next to the sideline, you are asking for trouble. Because it's really easy to screen and you can't go anywhere. And these pieces here becomes vulnerable to suffer things you don't like. And if they start piling in on this is bad. Not saying that there won't be times that where you need to do this and you can't avoid it, but I'm just saying, like, this is generally a situation you don't want to end up if you can avoid it. But that will happen sometimes. Right? So you can take this a step further, and we take the same cage, and this is usually what you see Elven teams similarly do, is this what is called the side cage. You have the ball carrier on the line of field, and then you have 2 carriers, 2 protectors, right? Which is fine in most cases. You still risk the surfing of these players to frenzy. You risk this one being dived and just pushed straight off the field, like unless you have sidestep or similar. So this becomes a vulnerable position. Sometimes, again, like Snuffle, good defense or whatever, can force us into positions that we need to do this. If you don't want to be frenzied off the field, these two need to go out, right? But if they go out, they're not protecting from here. So a version of this takes more players, but if you want to still do it and really less risk of those things, you do a extended side cage. This means that they need to do 2 dodges to get in here. It also means that it's going to get harder to actually punch a hole. And even if they do, you will most likely, because you're probably an alpha if you're doing this anyway, you will still be able to get out. And you have different paths out if you need to. So they probably won't be blocking all of it. But it takes also more players, of course. So that's side cages. I won't go into how to attack cages today because that's this whole like discipline in itself. But I think understanding that how the cages are built and how they build up, and most cases, what you do is with the positioning is right. You build the cage, and then you use your other players to screen, and then you use a piece or two to do your blitzing. Because if we just leave the cage by itself, I'll show you a match later with that. That's where it goes wrong. A cage can't survive on its own. It needs other protection. The cage is just to make sure that at least in this turn, most likely the ball is not going to be lost. That is the function of the cage, and then to move it somewhere, of course. Right. But we need other protection. That is also why you see a lot of people who are like scared is maybe not the right word, but like want to expand the protection of a cage is that they will go the classic, right? And then they will either put the ball carrier and another guy in here. So that you have 2 gaps, 1 gap, 2 gaps, 1 gaps. To just increase the amount of tackle zones. And also include that if the ball carrier gets blitzed, that the ball will probably end up somewhere where it's not easy to get to. This can be expanded by putting even more players around the cage, right? The more players, the harder it gets to get to, the more thing you need to remove to get it access to where it gets, let's call it juicy. But the other problem is you're spending more players, right? So that's the problem. Any questions to cages? Any questions? I actually already covered more or less everything there was about the 1-turn touchdown. So I will just really quickly touch on that because it was on the list, right? So 1-turn touchdowns is exactly stopping those Union Ls, those Skaven or something like that. If it's anything with flowing, I will just do that defense. That's the defense I would definitely do because more or less all you can do anyway. But the others, this is what I've seen. I'm not saying this is the right thing to do. I'm just saying this is what I've seen is usually is the 3 man on the line and then L1 columns. That is sort of the classic step 1. I'm not a big fan of that. I don't like this positioning over here because this is screaming for a frenzy player going to pushing it back in here, and I get that one push that I need to get over here, and we're off to the races. And there's nothing in my way, and it takes very few rolls, right? Not a big fan of this. And the problem is the second that this falls down to here, you just push your problem to being over here instead. So you don't really do that much in that sense. Then we can take a variation of this where instead of having the last chaiselong have it crooked, because at least that means that you can't push it that way. You need to push it that way. And that means that it needs to go there. And this guy where you really wanted to push him that direction, the square you want to be coming in at are blocked. So at least that, in my opinion, is an improvement. Still don't like this for other reasons. That is the other classic I've seen. Um, what's the other classics that are solo use? It is the doing it in the middle instead. I really don't like that one. Um, that's more or less, in my opinion, guaranteed to ask for trouble. There's the classic of trying to do the, and I think this is among, in my opinion, the worst, and then putting it the across the field down here, because generally doing this is basically saying to my opponent, you get all the shoves however you want it, unless I've Stanford as you want it. So you get to do everything up here. I'm just going to rely on, and as we saw earlier with the distance talk, that 1 in 9, 1 in 9, and 1 in 36 is going to stop you down here. And that is, in my opinion, unlikely to stop people. Like 1 in 9 plus 1 in 9 plus 1 in 36, you are better than 1 in 3 of doing that. You have a better chance of stopping them up here. And that's not including AG1, 2 heads, or any leap, or any of the other stuff that makes this even more likely. And that is also including that you got a full roster, because the second that one of these 11 players is missing, the distance goes up and the dancing through gets a lot easier, right? So not a fan of this. So what I do, and I have to say this is easier for orcs than it is for a lot of other teams, maybe dwarves are similar, like is a version that looks like this. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here because it makes it easy for me to draw. Neat. So far, I have used this about 50 times, and I've yet to see anyone who's successfully scored on it on one turn. And the reasoning for this is so you will notice that one of these are longer than the other. And the reason is we can only have 2 players in here. It also makes it harder for him to put stuff over here, so that makes the attack from this side and shoving stuff around much harder. And going around this side where he can have a lot of players to push into, but they also have a longer line to go around. And it also means that anyone who wants to come back and start pushing from this side has to run a lot longer. Right? The reasoning for this positioning, it looks like this, is generally the trick that you always want to go for when you're making one turns is that you want to push players back. You need something to pull them from this side of the line over here so you can start shuffling around with your players over here. And the only player that is really like accessible for that directly is these positions from in here. They need to come in here or here or here. Frenzy won't bring this guy back over here. So anything so this potentially these 5 guys or gals, let's not be sexist here, that has the potential of being pushed over the side. And all the positions from their back, good luck getting to those. If you can get to those, you got 2 6s or something silly, and don't get me wrong, but fair enough, then you get to get you one turn, that's all right. You can also try to jump in here. There's a lot of tackle zones for these squares, so probably not going to land there. So you need to then think, okay, if I can't push them straight, I need to push them crooked, like from the side. But the problem is all these positions are placed from the side with something in their way. So none of these are going to be pushed from the side either. And we can't push them from the side either here because there is gaps for these. If you start pushing from the side, that will move them over here. And that's also why there is nothing in here. Very important, there's nothing in here because otherwise we can push in here. If this square is taken, we can push it in here. It is not that this defense is foolproof and will save you every single time from a one-turn touchdown. It is just so far the best that I've seen to stop it. It's not impossible. And like, do they have Juggernaut? Do you have Stand Firm? Do you have Sidestep? Do they have blah, 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 blah? Of course matters. Or they can also just get the quick snap and then do it automatically for themselves. Luckily, I haven't had that happen to me, but that is definitely, I think, the best version of how to get around this defense as a one turn. And that's why it's along the side. And the cheslons and a loose grid, so there's no chain pushing through here. Long way around, shorter way around the side that where it's least likely that they can have a lot to bring in. So yeah. Cool. If I am right, you can now see my PowerPoints, and you can see these again. You see the field. So to sort of highlight what I knew that we'd be going over, I've picked some replays for matches where I think they could sort of showcase. And the replay is still there. Perfect. So just for quickly set up to where we're going to jump into second half. Moose is lucky enough to get a defensive touchdown from first half. So he should, for all intents and purposes, be in the driving seat in the sense that he technically don't need to do anything and he will still win. Which I think makes this institution even more interesting. So, for better and worse, this is a fairly classic defense. Like I more or less guarantees like this is a little bit more spread out than the ones that I showed, and it's because we don't have as many positionals to cover those areas. But that's basically the same version. Something to clean up the ball, the chevrons, trying to force in down the middle. So traditional, right? So ball lands, some punching, we gather around the ball. Very traditional. What happens here is traditional also for elves. You left space for me to claim, so I'm gonna search in. Put high pressure on the ball, makes sort of perfect sense. And we can sort of see from here how the match develops, right? So here, there's a high pressure. They need to gather up, build a cage, and get their sort of material in one place, right? They do. They luckily get the ball. They build a cage. But already here, we are in trouble. And this is the difference between looking at this from a elf coach or looking at this from the eyes from an orc coach. An elf coach here should see that there's two dice on the ball. With ease. And an orc player would think, I have almost a perfect good cage. What's the problem here? This guy here in the cage, the 4 pieces, is non-existent. He is at the start of the turn in base contact. That means he can go down. If I take one of these guys over here, I can get 2 dice on this one and throw him away. I can put this guy over here, attack these 2, and I have 2 dice now on the ball. So already here, we're in a bad spot. This cage is not secure. The elf player does, however, not see this. Yeah. So I actually talked about this with Moose yesterday, and he came with a really good analogy for it. Basically, Black Orcs are dwarves in a different color. They have the same movement, they have the same issues, they have the same functionality. So the difference is that Black Orcs like to foul, which dwarves don't, but dwarves do like to fight more. So that's basically the trade-off you're doing. So you get more fighting pieces, dwarves, or you get less fighting pieces, but with higher strength, but you get to foul instead. That's the difference between Black Orcs and dwarves. Which is, I find, I hadn't thought of it like that, but it's spot on. So, the elf player, however, does not see this. So he mucks up his turn, in lack of a better word, continues the pressure. This cage now needs to be saved, right? Because this is not safe, right? So he spends his turn saving up the cage. So this is a perfectly valid cage. The only problem that's here, but considering where we came from, is that we have players bogged down and are not assisting where we need them to be. But other than that, this is actually, from the Black Orcs playing side, pretty nice catch from where we was. And what happens here is what we can expect from Elf. We screen, we make sure that they can't go anywhere. If I was the Elf player, I would have made sure that these players down here could not come back. So that the players that we have now sort of separated from the pack are out of bounds and out of play. That's not what's happening. Here, however, it goes tits up. Like I said to Moose, like in this situation, he's technically better off just ending his turn, not doing a single thing, and doing that than what he ends up doing. And like that's the learning curve that we all have to go through. Because as an Orc player, especially, this looks good. I have a cage. I get to punch some people in the face. This is nice. As an Elmo player, however, I look at this in a very different light. So, like we talk about dive caging and positionals, right? So, he should have been thinking about, and I guarantee that he will forevermore from now on, this player, this player, this player, this player are unreliable. Depending on how the elves prioritize, they can take one of those pieces away. And any of those pieces going away, there's 2 dice on the ball. And even if none of those players goes down, there's a 2 dice on the ball here. This looks, smells, feels almost like a good position to be in until you start looking at it. Right? And that's also why, if we go back to the match, right, that there's a reason why we ended up here. And we go back to the turns, right? Like, already here is a problem, and this is a problem because of this, and this is a problem because of this. It's all connected. So usually when you end up in a situation like this, and this is where like new players usually start thinking about, I have a problem, I need to fix it, but you already caused a problem. It's already because positions you took earlier that you end up here. So when you go in and have a look at one of your replays, I would recommend you all do that after this. Notice how when you get to that problem that you sort of got stuck in, have a look at what happened before. Because this situation doesn't come from this turn. This comes from the turns coming before. Here, this is a perfect example of a cage that is about to fall. And it doesn't even need bringing it apart. And this is happening because the elf player forced the orc player to make a move that he didn't want to. And in this case, shouldn't have done. But by keeping that high pressure, just shielding it off, like I said, we're still in the early turns, so we're not breaking it. We're waiting for him to do arrows. And the Black Ox does. And as reward, this position is now lost, more or less. There's no way for the Black Ox to get out of this, more or less. And this is only looking like this because the Black Ox were a little bit lucky. The Black Ox try to clean up. It doesn't succeed. Gets double skulls. Bad luck, but even without that, it would most likely not have been saved. And from there, as it is almost any time the elves gets a hold of the ball is gone. Really? Bye-bye. And the game's over at this point. So the thing that I really want you to take away from this is positions and the match life cycle, like we talked about also. You have to go back and look at that always. Because most likely, whatever it is that you ended up in a terrible situation, it is because something went before it where you made a wrong call. 9 out of 10. Definitely. But this is a passive way of breaking the cage, right? Because what you're relying on is saying, like, I'm blocking you enough that if you want to make through, you're going to have to make some risky moves. And if that doesn't pan out, you will probably end up in a situation like that, right? So for better and worse, this is also how to break a cage. But the thing that I really want you also to take away from this is when you're looking at replays, look at the positioning, because from the pure positioning here, there's nothing each of these turns that I'm going to go through them one more time right here that is surprising. So the reason why we end up here is exactly because the pattern and the choices that we made from the receiving of the ball was already wrong. And it was compounded by further bad decisions down the road. This is the best turn that we get. This is the most best cleanup, best position, most pressure on the elf player. And the sad thing is, even from here, like I said, this position for the Black Orcs is safer, better. We can still win the game. We don't need to do anything. It's better to just end your turn here than doing this. But we all have, and I still have that, have a tendency to go like, I want to make something happen. I want to go up and punch people in the face, right? And yes, like time pressure, tilting, perfectly valid. I'm not dunking on Moose for doing this, because I could have done similar stupid shit. I re-watch my league matches every time after, and I can take the league match from yesterday or the one from today and go both times being like, yep, there's definitely turns that I did wrong, and sometimes it's the time crunch, sometimes it's because you just didn't see it, or whatever it is. But usually, and that's the reason why we want to go back and have a look, is why was it that things go tits up? Was it just Nuffle? If it was, like I played against Ringtail the other day and I got 2 times quad skulls in one match. Like, okay, that might really severely impact how things go, right? But if it's not that, then find out what it is. What it is that you did wrong, so you don't do it again. And that's how you grow as a player, become much better. But yes, not camp. You are so right. Like the time pressure is real. The bad dice, like here his double skulls, stuff like that. Like it does fuck with the head, and that's part of the game, and that's one of those things that are harder to master, but we really need to. So, have a look at your matches, just from this point of view. Like it's perfect because you get to see the positioning, how they shift. And when we're looking at positional play, this is all we actually care about. The patterns, soft defenses, walls, what's going on. So we could just talk about like the distance here, just like double gap here, because that shielding is not as important. The important shielding is down here, which is funny enough, really strong. This guy could probably have been over here, but that's like minimum optimizing, right? And if I was to redo this, I would take this guy down here and this guy over here. Because that means that if this guy gets punched out, there's no gap here. I can punch this guy out here, and I can sort of go over here. Black Orcs are just not quick enough that they can really capitalize on that. But other than that, there's a gap here that I can come through. So, and for those of you who are going to say a little bit more ready for some more complex, I would say, as an example, positional play. So if you don't want to be too much in the, lack of a better word, in the passenger seat and be in the driving seat of your matches, you need to consider what it is that you can do to change, like that pattern I just showed you, right? There's nothing in that is surprising. So you should be expecting that. So how do you then, as a coach, break that pattern so that it actually ends up being a match life cycle in the way that you want it to? So this is my last game on the ladder from last season, which I think has a really good example of that. So, Lizardmen versus my Daggers. Let's just jump. I think it's the second half. I will definitely have a look at that, Max, once we're done with the recording of the boot camp. But I'll definitely have a look, and we can continue talking that on just the stream afterwards. Need to see here. So this is the second half. Things to be mindful of is, so I did a DACA, so I'm ahead 1-0. That means I can accept a stall in the game. Like, I don't need anything to happen. I can just wait and see. So he makes the right call from the life cycle of the match that he needs a quick touchdown because it's the only way to win. And being at the 11th hour of the season, wins is all that matters. So wins at all costs. There's no prices for runners up, so to speak, right? Either you get in or you don't. So let's just skip to the... So he claims some territory. He makes a move for a quick touchdown. Bam. There's nothing in that that's really interesting. I just have to remember the match here. So we get to be the second part of the second half. So now he has to defend. Defending, attacking. And what I'm wanting to do is I want to control the pacing here because I'm still early in the match. So I could probably score with these on turn 14. But he has a 9 movement, 2 AG, sure hands, block piece that he will score. I can't give him 3 turns. I can't give him 2. I can barely give him 1. So I need to drag this to turn 16, and then I have a chance of winning, right? So I need to time my attack. The problem is normal pattern here. If I don't do something to break normal pattern, I will end up scoring too early because I can't defend long enough and not take too much attrition that I need to break the pattern. So what I do is I secure the ball. I think that's the first turn. The ball secured. And I do this. Whoop, 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 whoop. And a keen eye will see that this is not a secure cage. And it's definitely not a secure screening. There is a guy here, 2 dice on this guy, and this guy is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the funny thing is, I did this fully on purpose. I'm doing this to break the pattern of what I'm seeing that will happen if I just do the match standard. The reason I'm doing this is he has 2 rerolls. And he has all these players down here. So he's in a position to defend, and he will make me suffer every turn that I have to stall him out. So what I want to do is I want to draw his pieces in. I am luring him to come up here and do something. And in a normal sense, this is risky in the sense that this I have to assume is going to happen. A punch, a push, anything is good enough. And that means that on 2 going forwards, it's 2 dice on the ball carrier. Now, Dark Elves has a nasty little surprise, which is called drop off, and when you have passed 2+, you can pass the 2+ over there. So how much of a risk is this actually? I am forcing him into a position where he's going to take his most important piece. This is the biggest threat that I have to all my block dodge pieces, right? And throw him somewhere on the field that if he goes down here, he won't have time to come back and stop me in the remaining turns. So I'm luring his most important pieces into going somewhere they really don't need to. Now, this could be done in different ways. Like if you don't adopt drop off as this Dark Elves have, like just moving over here so that what you're basically going is like, oh, you can get to me and you can attack me. Oh, it's going to be scary. 2+ and I'm away, right? This point is a dump off just to lure him even more. Of course, Nuffle decides that a 1 is clearly the fair way to do this. And of course, a bounce in the wrong direction is, of course, absolutely what needs to happen, right? So he gets the block. Fails. And now he sends everything in, right? And at this point, I am basically pressured highly. Because this guy is going to be hard to get the ball off, but it's not impossible. But the perk for me is actually in this situation. Like, I had expected like at least this much would sort of swarm in. But because he actually gets this luck, he gets everything else and just shoves it in. Stop moving. Good. So from that positioning before to here. But he has technically made a tactical error here, in my opinion. Because from this position, there's only two ways the game is going to go. Either I don't stop this, and he will have to score next turn, and I will have another go at it. And I will at least get the draw. If it doesn't work out for him, he has nothing else left to stop me. He has pushed everything in. He's called, for those of you who play poker, all into the pot. And that is too much in this situation. Because with this kind of players that I have as Dark Elves here on this team, getting down to that ball and getting it out of your hands, that is definitely on the table. And funny enough, it's also what happens. 1, to get that guy away. 2, to get 3 dices. So, and make sure that I can push it in the right direction. I luckily get a power on the first dice. I would have gotten 3 more and a reroll. Secured on a blood punch piece that you can't get away with, right? And now all his positionals are out of place and out of whack. And the only reason why this got a little bit scary from this situation is because I rolled a 1 here. And I got a bad bounce. If that bounce had been over here, it would not have been so scary. But by me from turn before predicting what the play pattern for this half would be like, seeing what would happen when this team faces this team and what will happen over these turns, and using that positional play to then force a match in the pattern that I wanted to go, and even doing something which is a tiny bit risky, fair to be fair, but to break that pattern that it would otherwise be the standard if I don't do anything right. That is what the difference between playing in middle range elo or high elo. It is that thing about, and for better and worse, the game that I just showed with Moose, right? That is a match that just follows the standard pattern of play. Neither the Wood Elf or the Blackhawks does anything that sort of breaks the standard. So they're basically more just at the whim of the dice, right? Because they're just doing what feels natural every single turn. And that will give you a win rate of 55% in most cases, and that's decent. But if you want to get a win rate that is a fair bit over 60, you need to be able to see those patterns. You need to be able to see the positionings and see what's going to happen in a second. So I have a third replay that I wanted to show you. Being the nerd that I am, of course, watch the World Cup and watch the matches because I wanted to see like what are those who are like at the peak of Blood Bowl able to do, right? So if we take the grand final and we take the third match. I think Diadem played a really, really good match and was unlucky not to win. Andre played astonishing well too, but I just don't think that as well. And got a, but I want to show you, comparing to next time you go and play someone on Arena or somewhere else where you get to see, let's call it all levels of play, and you run into a bad player, notice the difference between what's going on here. So standard defense, standard offense positioning, Nothing's touching. Very little is touching. Very little is touching. Very little is... Now everything is touching. Because this has started to go tits up. Not until then. There is much more of a probing, trying to manage the clock, manage the time, getting a bit of soft damage in here and there before. And then it just goes into madness. And it's mostly because one of these two is playing All World Nobility, which have a team sort of strength that is that the more they group together, the stronger they are. The more they get spread out, the weaker they get. So that's why they clump up together. But it's also why like Ender is able here to sort of like run off to the side and wants to do that, and it makes it hard for them to sort of do something good. Soft defense positioning, and a dragging out the clock, because doing like this is the very simplest version of if I don't do anything, the time will run out here and he will have too much time to score, so I need to manage the clock right. So it's all about managing the clock. It's all about managing what happens when in the match. This down here is just facilitating that. Right? Need to stop him being able to stall. I want to stall. Are you sure you want to stall? I am taking a big gamble and stalling again to make sure that you can't score. He gets not really away with it, but he still does. Still got his touchdown. But it's really risky also. But because he managed his timing, he kills off Diadem's chance for any counter touchdown in that half line. And that controls the match state into a position that is much more favorable to him. Second half, yeah. Like those are also details that of course matters, right? Like the attrition and stuff like that. But the thing that I find interesting is much more also like I said, the full line defense, right? And this is because Diadem is in this situation under the gun. Like he needs to make something happen, so he's gonna go all out. He's now in a position where he can't. He needs 2 touchdowns in a 1/2. So let's make something happen. But notice how much like there's just positioning. We are arguing over who gets to go where and what happens where. That is what's being fought over here. And compared to the first replay that I showed you, it was much more just shoving your pieces in, much more of just doing what felt right in each of the turns. This is much more about what is right at this point for the match. And don't get me wrong, but it doesn't get much higher level than Blood Bowl than this. And that is that comprehension of the 5 layers that I started with showing you guys. That fully functioning, that we are working on all 5 layers at any given moment. And every time something happens at any of the layers, we are reassessing if the others need to change and adapt. And when you can do that as good as these 2 guys can do, you can win a World Cup. And if you can do it even just at a 10th of their level, you can win a UK BBL championship. That is the difference. Because let's be a little bit, I was going to say mean here and say like everyone can take their pieces and push them in and roll the dice. Everyone can do that. And then we can see if Nuffle likes your dice or not, and that's it. But you will have a win rate about 50% about if you play against equal players, but you will most likely not play against equal players. They will probably be better than you, so you will probably end up with a win rate of 40%. And luckily, to my best of knowledge, there's none of you that has a win rate of 40%, right? So at least you are a lot better than that. So what we're looking at is those small little differences at the end of like how to go from 40 to 50% is just stop doing stupid shit and I don't see anyone in you doing that. So at least you should be at 50%. I see you most. This is my interpretation and sensing is around the 55 to 60%. But it also means that once you get up to there, it gets a lot harder to get those like last finals, and you need to dig a lot deeper in understanding the match mechanics to sort of catch what's going on and optimize that, because it is not as apparent as it is at the lower echelons, right? I think Retros is Dark Elves, just for showing you the. Well, here's the thing. If your match goal is to have fun and throw dice, play goblins, halflings, or play fun with anyone on the team, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that is a wrong way to play Blood Bowl. What I'm trying to say is more like if that's not your goal and you want to win, then there's other things you should maybe consider. But there those who just played for the laughs and giggles and let's call it the story version of it, where it's like you get a story and this perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that, right? So here you have what is this? This is nobility versus dark elves, right? Nothing's touching. Nothing's touching. Nothing's touching. Nothing's touching. No, one player's touching. Two players maybe touching. Nothing's touching. And if I guarantee you, if we go in and take a live match now from in bronze somewhere, everything is touching. Because they don't do positional play. They do action play. Just for funsies, let's do that. Community, live, minimum ranking. As far as I remember, there's one here we can do creation, team value, skill rating. Worst to best. Let's see. Who has the dubious honor of being the current most questionable match live? Everything is touching. Everything is touching.
Hasn't that player been sent off, Bob?
Right?
Yeah, that was before the ref was.
Because that's what we play at this level. And at the highest level, so generally I would say you can go in and take your last replay and just count how many turns and how many players you have your models based. I know that if you're playing like orcs or black orcs or something like that, of course, yeah, I think that was a 3,000 team coupling team, but yeah, uh, you can see at how to say how much you're doing positional play. Like Dark Elves is a perfect example. Like generally, Dark Elves should never be basing unless they have a really good reason to, which is rare, but they do sometimes have a reason to. So you should generally not be basing, right? Is it just because he wasn't finished loading? What's happening here? Coloring, where's the rest? Let's not take that. Let's take that one. Of course, it's a kickoff, so we can't see diddly what. I feel robbed there. But yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's actually what I had to tell for today. I spent 2 hours and I was thinking like I have enough to talk to you for like 30 minutes and it'll probably be over. So I think if you're playing dwarves, you of course going to be basing more because that's where you need to live and operate. If you're playing elves, you shouldn't be basing. Humans being a hybrid in the sense that they are sort of in between, uh, need to base more than elves, less than dwarves, right? And generally, you can always look at it this way. So each team has a certain play style that they prefer. Meaning, like if you are playing orcs, you want to be in base contact and hitting the opponent in the head. The more of your matches that is that you, key important, you hitting your opponent in the head, the more likely you are going to win. If you are an elf player, what you want to be doing is not touching anyone and having the ball. The closer you get to that, the more likely you are to win. If you are a dark elf player and you are bashing your opponent in base contact every turn, you're probably asking for problems. You might get away with it sometimes, but you are asking for problems. If you're an orc player who spends his turns running your pieces around the field, you're probably also asking for problems. And in that sense, purely also by looking at what, let's say, style your team should be running towards, you can see how well you're doing, right? Let's see if we can find something here. I'm trying to avoid those teams that just like dwarves just want to go all in, right? So it's a bad example of what a match would look like. Trying to remember the shield types and what type of teams it is. Pro elves versus something else here, right? That should be undead ability, right? Everything is based. Right? Just don't do it. We even only in turn 3, right? And everything is based. Why are all these elves in a position where they're getting based? So the problem is also sometimes just to sort of is that if as much as I as an elf player don't want to be based, if I'm playing against someone new, they will of course keep pushing all the pieces in, and it can actually sometimes therefore be harder to play against lower ranking players, so to speak, because they have a play style that just makes what you should be doing and focusing on harder to do because they don't play at that level where Diadem or Andri are playing at, right? So just like if you're like for you who have played poker, if you play poker against people who have never played poker before, it's atrocious because they don't conform to any of the rules that what they should be doing, and it becomes just like this game of chaos instead. So for better and worse, it can be dangerous to play against new players, right? In that sense, because they just have a different approach to everything. I really don't like this, what's going on here, but that's a completely right. So cool. I will cut the recording for the boot camp, but I will continue streaming. I'll just wrap that one up, and then I think Maximus or was it DK Max that had a replay? I think we could have a look at. I do live learn sometimes. You can always ping me on the Discord if you wanna have me have a look at something or a team or roster or anything, and of course welcome to do that. And for everyone else and those who have watched, thank you. And hopefully see you next time. See you next week. Bye.